I don't really know where I am right now. When I'm not around, my wife takes the dogs for walks, and she takes them more in different places than I do. She goes different fields and different directions and all that. And I thought for a change I'd let the dogs take me for a walk today, and they take me on one of my wife's walks, and as a result I have no real idea where I am. So I'm just kind of trusting that they'll get me home eventually. Which is very nice actually where I am. It's not bad at all. Quite nice. Bit of traffic noise. But what I've been thinking about is about nonsense and sense and ideas. And this is really triggered because I was on a site yesterday, which is quite an old site, it's been around for a while. It's called the Postmodern Thesis Generator, and it's a comedy site. It's great, actually. It's really funny, and it's a site which I guess there's some kind of piece of software running in the background, which generates, in some cases, quite convincing sounding articles, essays, which kind of recycle all of the jargon that you find in postmodern, post-structuralist, those kind of areas of writing. So there's clearly some words which repeat. So words like hermeneutics, post-colonial, deconstruction, the same writers, Lacan, Heidegger, a whole bunch of vaguely trendy Zizek. All these people their names are clearly in the database. And then there's some kind of pop cultural references which you tend to find in those things. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer is in there, Madonna, that kind of TV shows, names of TV shows. So you just refresh it and it just endlessly produces these, in some ways, relatively plausible sounding essays and articles, which are really just a series of buzzwords strung together by some basic grammatical constructions, and then kind of, syntactical effects placed on them so that these terms tend to loop around. But they're great. I really like it, and obviously they're just a joke. They're not to be taken seriously. But what I find with those is some of them work better than others, and I don't really know what I mean when I say that, and that's quite baffling. I don't really know why some of those essays work better than others. And by work, I don't mean they make sense, because none of them really make sense. There's nothing, you can't look through this essay to its conclusions and be kind of swayed by its arguments in any meaningful sense. The extent that they work is in a kind of different way. I don't really know what it is. It's reminding me of a couple of things, actually. The first thing it's reminding me of is some stuff I've talked about before, which is to do with linguistic effects. So how certain kinds of writing, particularly religious writing, metaphysical writing, has a particular kind of set of effects, which are either attributed as murkiness, if you're following Dan Dennett, or obscurantism, if you're expecting a kind of scientific writing, or from a kind of cognitive linguistics, cognitive poetics viewpoint, those effects are the kind of the point. And here there's a really nice book by Ray Vanseur, I think it's pronounced, called On the Shores of Nothingness, where he analyses metaphysical texts, metaphysical poets and spiritual writings, and talks about the effects that this writing has, and how the effects that those effects simulate some of the conditions attributed to those mystical states. So the writing produces in its reader the effects that it's kind of alluding to in the content. Now, that's very specific to metaphysical writing, but maybe there's some kind of relationship between that and postmodern, post-structural, jargon-ridden nonsense, because some of it is overt nonsense. The postmodern generator stuff is supposed to be nonsense. That's kind of the point. So where am I going with that? I suppose the second thing is to do with what the nature of that kind of writing is like. I mean, certainly knowledge in some of those writing enterprises. Here I guess I'm talking about real postmodern writing, real post-structuralist writing. writing that really comes out of those disciplines, as opposed to its parodies. Quite often its aim isn't to mystify, at least not in the obscurantist sense that I've referred to. Its aim is perhaps to do something else, and that's perhaps to do with the way that knowledge works in relation to that. Because it's not, a lot of that isn't about us finding some hard knowledge at the end of this particular linguistic rainbow. It's about reading. It's about the active principle of reading, and how a good, in inverted commas, piece of post-structuralist writing or literary criticism in some places, or those kind of theory, as it's sometimes called, just theory, a good piece of that quite often is not about, as I say, finding definitive truths. It's about destabilizing definitive truths and offering new, fragile, possibly temporary constructions, a bit like you would do with a kind of Lego set, really. You're putting these things together with the full knowledge that it can be taken apart again, and with the full knowledge that what you're doing is putting something together, not revealing something. So what's all that about now? I suppose I'm just I don't know what I'm talking about, actually. I think I'm talking bullshit really now. I suppose all I'm saying is that maybe there's a poetics of post-structuralist writing, theory writing, which is in which the difficulty of that kind of writing overlaps with the nonsensical nature of some of that writing. So there will be times, just like in arts practice, there are times when certain art practices overlap with the practices of nonsense and the practices of randomness and the practices of chaos and the practices of childlike activity. There's a lot of overlap between those. So maybe there's a kind of epistemological equivalent to that, where the practices of producing nonsense or pastiche overlap with the practices of actually producing this kind of knowledge, which is reliant on particular cognitive effects. Actually, there's a phrase: if you can't dazzle them with science, baffle them with bullshit. So maybe it's just that. But bullshit is nice sometimes, as long as you know what you're getting into.